For more than 70 years, people have laughed at the same character. A skinny coyote, a desert road, a bluebird that never seems worried, and a plan that always goes wrong. He builds rockets, he orders machines, he straps himself to inventions that should probably require a federal inspection. And every time, we know exactly what is about to happen. The trap will fail, the explosion will come, the cliff will appear, and Wile E. Coyote will fall again. So we laugh, because that is what the cartoon taught us to do. But I think we have been asking the wrong question. The question was never, why doesn't Wile E. Coyote ever catch the Roadrunner? The better question is, why does he wake up every morning believing today could be different? Because that completely changes the story. Suddenly, Wile E. Coyote is not just a cartoon character. He becomes a psychological case study. Not because he fails, but because failure never seems to become his identity. Think about that. Most people do not quit because they physically cannot continue. They quit because hope quietly disappears. One rejection, one failed business, one relationship that did not work, one video that barely got views, one dream that started feeling embarrassing to explain, and slowly the mind starts rewriting the story. Maybe I am not talented enough. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe I am not the kind of person this happens for. Maybe I should stop trying before people notice I still care. But Wile E. Coyote does something strange. He falls off the cliff, he hits the ground. He gets flattened, burned, crushed, launched, buried, humiliated, and somehow the next episode begins with possibility. There is no dramatic speech, no inspirational music, no healing montage. No one sits him down and says, "You are enough." He simply begins again. And that may be the first lesson. Most people think resilience is surviving the fall. Real resilience is refusing to let the fall become your identity. But this is not just a video about resilience, because resilience by itself is not always wisdom. Sometimes persistence is strength. Sometimes persistence is self-sabotage, wearing a motivational quote. That is where Wile E. Coyote becomes more interesting, because he does not just show us the beauty of never giving up. He also shows us the danger of never changing. Every episode, he comes back with a new plan, but often it is built on the same assumption. One more gadget, one more shortcut, one more ACME package, one more external solution. And that is where this cartoon starts looking uncomfortably modern. Because today, we may not be ordering rocket skates from ACME, but we do order productivity systems. AI tools, courses, prompts, apps, gear, 10-step formulas, overnight success strategies. And sometimes, without realizing it, we are doing exactly what he did. We are trying to buy the skill we have not yet built. We are trying to outsource the growth we have not yet earned. We are hoping the next tool will finally make us the person we have not practiced becoming. Everyone has a roadrunner. For some people, it is the book they keep saying they are going to write. For some, it is the business they cannot seem to start. For some, it is healing from burnout, leaving the relationship, becoming a better parent, becoming a better leader, learning AI before the world changes without them. For some, the roadrunner is not even a goal. It is a version of themselves they keep chasing. And maybe that is why we laugh so hard, because when we are children, we think we are watching a cartoon. But as adults, something changes. We begin to recognize the chase. We recognize the planning, the hope, the embarrassment, the overthinking, the impossible goal. The moment when you run off the cliff and do not fall immediately, because for one brief second, belief is still holding you up. Then you look down and reality arrives. But here's the part almost everyone misses. The cliff is not the lesson. The fall is not even the lesson. The real question is what happens the next morning. Because every life eventually creates a cliff, a moment where the plan collapses, a moment where confidence disappears, a moment where the thing you thought would work does not work. And in that moment, the mind has to make a decision. Was this a failure or was this information? Was this proof that I should stop, or was this feedback telling me I need to change the way I climb? That is the difference between repetition and growth. And it may be the difference between Wile E. Coyote as a joke and Wile E. Coyote as one of the most misunderstood characters ever created. Because maybe he was never really chasing the roadrunner. Maybe he was chasing the belief that tomorrow could still be different. And if we can understand that, we may understand something deeper about ourselves. Have you ever noticed something strange about Wile E. Coyote? It's not about the explosions. It is not about the cliffs. Not even the ACME inventions. There is something much quieter. Every episode begins as if yesterday never happened. Think about that for a moment. Yesterday's failure doesn't become today's identity. There isn't a scene where Wile E. Coyote sits alone in the desert questioning whether he still has what it takes. There isn't an episode where he decides the last 1,000 failures mean he should lower his expectations. There isn't a moment where he says, maybe I'm just not the kind of coyote who catches roadrunners. Instead, the sun rises, a brand new blueprint appears, and another idea takes shape, and somehow hope survives. That may be the most unrealistic part of the cartoon, not because hope is unrealistic, but because most adults slowly lose the ability to begin again. As children, we fail constantly. We fall while learning to walk. We mispronounce words, we draw terrible pictures. We lose games, we ask embarrassing questions. And none of it changes who we believe we are. Failure is simply part of learning. But somewhere along the way, something changes. Failure stops being something we experience. It becomes something we become. I failed the interview becomes I'm not leadership material. My business didn't work becomes I'm just not an entrepreneur. My book wasn't successful becomes maybe I'm not really a writer. Can you hear the difference? One describes an event, the other describes an identity, and that shift changes everything. Psychologists have spent decades studying why some people continue after setbacks while others quietly walk away. One of the most influential researchers, Martin Seligman, discovered that the difference often isn't the setback itself, it's the explanation we create. Some people interpret failure as permanent, others see it as temporary, some see it as personal, others see it as specific. Some conclude, this happened because I'm incapable. Others ask, what can I learn before I try again? The event is identical. The story is completely different. I'd like to call this identity drift. Identity drift happens when a single disappointment slowly changes the way you introduce yourself to yourself. You stop saying, I had a setback, and you begin saying, I'm the kind of person setbacks happen to. That may sound like a small distinction, but it determines whether people keep moving or quietly stop trying. Now let's go back to the desert, because whether the creators intended it or not, Wile E. Coyote gives us a fascinating psychological model. Every explosion damages his body. None of them seem to damage his expectation that another attempt is possible. That's extraordinary. He protects something most adults unknowingly sacrifice, not his pride, his possibility. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not suggesting Wile E. Coyote is secretly a psychologist or that the writers intentionally embedded modern theories of resilience into a Saturday morning cartoon. But sometimes stories become larger than the intentions of the people who created them. And that's what makes great stories timeless. They continue teaching lessons their creators never explicitly planned. Think about some of the most accomplished people in history. James Dyson built thousands of prototypes before creating the vacuum cleaner that transformed his industry. Thomas Edison became famous not because every experiment worked, but because he treated unsuccessful attempts as information rather than identity. Their stories aren't inspiring because they failed. They're inspiring because failure never convinced them they were finished. That's an important distinction. Resilience isn't pretending failure doesn't hurt. Failure always hurts. Resilience is refusing to let pain become your autobiography. Because the real danger isn't rejection, the real danger is conclusion. The moment you decide the evidence is complete, the moment you say, I've seen enough, this is who I am, my opportunity has passed, hope disappears long before ability does. That's why researchers studying hope have reached an unexpected conclusion. Hope isn't simply optimism. Hope is believing another pathway still exists. When one door closes, hope asks, what other door haven't I seen yet? That changes the way we think about Wile E. Coyote. Maybe every blueprint wasn't just another trap. Maybe every blueprint was evidence that he still believed another pathway existed. And if that's true, then his greatest strength wasn't persistence, it was imagination. Because every new attempt required him to picture a future different from the past. That's what hope really is, the ability to imagine tomorrow without allowing yesterday to dictate its limits. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because hope by itself is not enough. Imagination by itself is not enough. Resilience by itself is not enough. There is one pattern hidden inside nearly every episode. One mistake so familiar that many of us repeat it every single day. It wasn't chasing the roadrunner, it wasn't refusing to quit, it was believing the next solution could be delivered in a box. And that one idea might be the most relevant lesson Wile E. Coyote has to teach us today. The ACME trap. This is a story about the tools we use and the habits we miss. If I asked you to name the real villain of these cartoons, most people would probably say the roadrunner. But I don't think the roadrunner was ever the biggest obstacle. I think it was this ACME. Every episode begins the same way. A problem appears, the equipment changes, the explosions change, the plans change. And instead of asking, what skill do I need to develop? Wile E. Coyote asks, what can I order? The right thinking, the right questions, the right practice. The pages are filled with beautiful illustrations, bold claims, impossible promises, rocket-powered skates, instant solutions. Machines designed to eliminate effort. The message is always the same. You don't have to become different. You just need better equipment. Sound familiar? Today, the ACME catalog looks a little different. It's an advertisement promising overnight success. It's the newest productivity system, the latest AI platform, a course that guarantees 6 figures, a camera that promises cinematic videos, a microphone that promises professional sound, a prompt that promises perfect results. The products have changed, the psychology hasn't. Now, before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. This isn't an argument against technology. I love technology. I use AI almost every single day. It has changed the way I research, create, write, and communicate. The problem has never been the tool. The problem is the expectation we place on the tool. Because tools amplify thinking, they don't replace it. Think about it this way. Give a master chef a basic kitchen, and they'll probably cook an incredible meal. Give someone with no cooking experience the most expensive kitchen in the world, and they still won't know what to make. The kitchen didn't create the skill. The skill created value from the kitchen. The same is true for AI, the same is true for cameras, the same is true for books. The same is true for leadership, the same is true for almost everything in life. We often believe we're missing the right tool when in reality, we're missing the right habits. I'd like to introduce a concept I call competence debt. Competence debt builds every time we expect a tool to replace a skill instead of strengthening one. At first, everything feels easier. The software writes faster, the app organizes better, the automation saves time, the shortcut works. But eventually the bill arrives. Because the moment the tool changes or disappears or breaks, you're forced to discover whether you ever develop the underlying ability. That's competence debt. It's borrowing confidence from technology instead of earning confidence through growth. And if we're honest, most of us have done it. We've convinced ourselves, if I just had a better laptop, if I just bought that course, if I just upgraded my camera, if I just found the perfect AI prompt, then everything would finally come together. Better tools really do help, but here's the uncomfortable truth. A better tool can improve your performance, it cannot build your character, it can speed up your work, it cannot decide what work is worth doing. It can generate ideas, it cannot give you wisdom. It can improve execution, it cannot replace judgment. That's why 2 people can use the exact same technology and produce completely different results. One creates something remarkable, the other creates something forgettable. Not because the software changed, because the thinker changed. And maybe that's where Wile E. Coyote made the same mistake over and over again. Notice what almost never changes. The equipment changes, the explosions change, the plans change, but his relationship with the solution doesn't. Every failure convinces him to order something bigger, something faster, something more complicated, something more expensive. Rarely does he stop and ask, what if the answer isn't another invention? What if the answer is becoming a different version of myself? That's a question every creator eventually faces, every entrepreneur, every leader, every parent, every student, every person trying to build a meaningful life. Because there comes a point where no new tool can solve an old mindset. No software can make difficult conversations easier if you've never learned how to communicate. No AI can replace curiosity. No productivity system can replace discipline. No camera can replace storytelling. No prompt can replace clear thinking. The greatest advantage has never been access to tools. It's the ability to think well enough to use them wisely. That's why I often say, stop prompting AI, start directing it. The future doesn't belong to the people with the most software. It belongs to the people who know what they're trying to create before they ever open the software. And perhaps that's the hidden tragedy of Wile E. Coyote. He wasn't lacking intelligence. His inventions were incredibly creative. He wasn't lacking effort. No one worked harder. He wasn't lacking imagination. Every episode proved he had plenty of that. What he lacked was adaptation. He kept changing the equipment without changing the assumption behind the equipment. And that's a mistake that's surprisingly easy to make, because changing your tools feels like progress. Changing yourself feels uncomfortable. One gives you the excitement of something new. The other requires humility, the willingness to admit maybe the next breakthrough isn't out there. Maybe it's in here. And that realization changes the entire story. Because if ACME was never the answer, then who was? There was one character in the desert who never needed a catalog, never ordered a gadget, never searched for shortcuts, never seemed distracted by bigger, faster, or newer, the Roadrunner. And hidden inside that simple observation is one of the most overlooked lessons in emotional intelligence. For most of this video, we've been looking at the wrong character. Not because Wile E. Coyote isn't fascinating, he is. But every great story has two sides. And if the Coyote teaches us something about hope, the Roadrunner teaches us something about focus. Think back to every cartoon you've ever watched. What does the Roadrunner actually do? Almost nothing. He doesn't give motivational speeches. He doesn't taunt Wile E. Coyote. He doesn't spend his days plotting revenge. He doesn't obsess over defeating an enemy. He simply keeps moving. That might sound obvious, but psychologically, it's profound. Because one of the greatest differences between emotionally reactive people and emotionally intelligent people isn't intelligence. It isn't talent, it isn't personality, it's where they place their attention. Wile E. Coyote wakes up every day thinking about one thing, the Roadrunner. His entire emotional world is organized around something outside of himself. Every decision, every invention, every ounce of energy is devoted to catching someone else. The Roadrunner doesn't seem to live that way. His attention stays remarkably simple. Run, adapt, keep moving. There's an old saying that says, where attention goes, energy flows. Whether or not you've heard that phrase before, you've probably lived it. Think about the last time someone criticized you. Maybe it was one comment online, one difficult coworker, one rejection, one conversation that stayed in your mind long after it ended. Have you ever noticed how a single thought can consume an entire day? Your body is sitting at dinner, but your mind is replaying the meeting. You're driving home, but you're still arguing with someone who isn't even in the car. You're trying to enjoy your family while mentally chasing something that happened hours ago. That's what attention does. It doesn't just shape what you notice, it shapes the life you experience. I'd like to call this the Roadrunner effect. The Roadrunner effect is the ability to keep moving toward what matters, without becoming emotionally trapped by everything trying to pull you sideways. That doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means refusing to let every distraction become your destination. Because here's something remarkable, the Roadrunner almost never wastes energy trying to defeat Wile E. Coyote. He isn't trying to win an argument, he simply continues living. How different would our lives look, and if we did the same? How much energy do we spend trying to convince people who have already decided not to understand us? How many hours disappear because we're replaying conversations we'll never change? How many dreams are delayed because we're still trying to defeat yesterday instead of building tomorrow? Successful people aren't successful because they never face opposition. They're successful because they don't organize their lives around opposition. They organize their lives around progress. There's an important distinction there. Progress doesn't require perfect conditions, it requires sustained direction. Psychologists sometimes describe attention as one of our most valuable mental resources. Unlike money, attention cannot be earned back once it's spent. Every minute you give to resentment is a minute you cannot invest in growth. Every hour you spend comparing yourself to someone else is an hour you're not becoming someone stronger. Every day spent chasing validation is a day not spent creating value. The Roadrunner seems to understand something that many of us forget. Forward motion is more powerful than constant reaction. Now let's be honest, none of us are actually being chased by a cartoon coyote, but many of us are chased by something else. Fear, comparison, regret, perfectionism, the pressure to keep up, the fear of falling behind, the voice that whispers, you're too late, you're not ready, they're already ahead. If those voices control your attention, they eventually control your direction. That's why emotional intelligence isn't just about understanding emotions. It's about deciding which emotions deserve your energy. Not every feeling deserves a permanent residence in your mind. Some emotions are visitors, not roommates. Imagine trying to drive across the country while stopping every 5 miles because someone honked at you. It would be exhausting, yet that's exactly how many people move through life emotionally. Every criticism becomes a detour. Every setback becomes an identity crisis. Every disagreement becomes an obsession. Meanwhile, the people making meaningful progress often appear almost boring. They wake up, they do the work, they improve a little, they repeat. Not because life is easier for them, because their attention is more disciplined. And maybe that's the greatest contrast between these two characters. Wile E. Coyote spends enormous amounts of energy trying to control someone else. The Roadrunner spends almost all of his energy controlling himself. One life is built around pursuit. The other is built around movement. One reacts, one responds, one is consumed by what he lacks, the other simply expresses what he already is. But before we celebrate the Roadrunner too quickly, there's one more lesson hiding in the desert, because neither character, by themselves, gives us the complete picture. Hope without focus can become obsession. Focus without hope can become routine. Real growth requires both. And nowhere is that more obvious than the moment Wile E. Coyote steps off the edge of a cliff. Have you ever walked into a meeting feeling completely confident until someone asked one unexpected question? Have you ever stood on a stage feeling prepared until you suddenly became aware that everyone was looking at you? Have you ever played a sport effortlessly until you started thinking about every movement your body was making? Nothing changed. The audience didn't change, the room didn't change, your abilities didn't suddenly disappear. What changed was your awareness. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as self-focused attention. It's the moment your attention shifts away from the task and turns inward. Instead of doing, you begin monitoring yourself doing. Instead of speaking, you begin evaluating every word as you say it. Instead of trusting your preparation, you begin questioning your performance. Athletes know this feeling, musicians know this feeling, public speakers know this feeling, parents know this feeling, creators know this feeling, you know this feeling. I'd like to call it the cliff principle. The cliff principle is simple. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't the obstacle in front of you. It's the moment you stop trusting yourself. Think about how many opportunities have been lost, not because someone lacked talent, but because fear interrupted performance. The interview, the audition, the first date, the difficult conversation, the presentation, the business launch, the book you never published, the video you never uploaded. Not because it wasn't good enough, because somewhere along the way, you looked down, and once you looked down, your imagination began working against you. Instead of imagining success, you imagined embarrassment. Instead of imagining progress, you imagined failure. Instead of seeing possibility, you saw consequences. That's what anxiety often does. It doesn't predict the future, it rehearses it, usually the version you fear the most. And the fascinating thing is, your brain often reacts to imagined danger as though it's happening right now. Your heart races, your muscles tighten, your breathing changes. Not because you've fallen, because your mind believes you're about to. That's why emotional intelligence is so important. It teaches us that not every thought deserves belief, not every fear deserves obedience, not every emotion deserves control of the steering wheel. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. Fear is part of being human. The goal is to keep moving while fear rides in the passenger seat instead of handing it the keys. Now let's go back to the cliff, because there's another detail almost everyone overlooks. Wile E. Coyote always falls, always. But that's never where the story ends. The next episode begins, and somehow he's back. No dramatic explanation, no permanent damage, no identity crisis, just another sunrise, another sketch, another possibility. That's worth paying attention to, because in real life, we don't get to erase yesterday. We remember the disappointment, we remember the criticism, we remember the betrayal. So maybe the lesson isn't to forget the fall. Maybe it's to remember it differently. There's a profound difference between asking, why did this happen to me? And asking, what is this trying to teach me? One question searches for blame, the other searches for growth. One keeps you standing at the bottom of the cliff, the other starts looking for the path back up. This is where resilience becomes transformation. Not because you become immune to failure, but because failure stops being your teacher's final exam and becomes your classroom. Every entrepreneur knows this. Every inventor, every scientist, every artist, every great leader. Their careers aren't built on avoiding cliffs. They're built on learning how to climb them more intelligently each time. And that's where I think we've misunderstood Wile E. Coyote. We've spent decades laughing at the fall when we should have been paying attention to the climb. Because the climb is where character is built. The climb is where perspective changes. The climb is where better questions are born. And eventually, if you're willing to keep climbing, the person who reaches the top isn't the same person who fell. That's growth. But before we end, there's one final realization that completely changes this story. Because after spending 75 years watching Wile E. Coyote, I don't think the main character was ever the coyote. And I don't think it was the roadrunner either. I think it was us. When I was a kid, I knew exactly who I thought I was in these cartoons. I was the roadrunner, fast, carefree, untouchable. And Wile E. Coyote, he was the joke, the character you laughed at before moving on to the next episode. But something strange happens as you get older. You stop watching the cartoon and the cartoon starts watching you. Because somewhere along the way, you realize you've spent your life chasing something. Maybe it was success, maybe it was security, maybe it was love, maybe it was recognition, maybe it was becoming the version of yourself you always believed was possible. Whatever it was, you've had your own roadrunner. You've had mornings when you believed this would finally be the day. You've had evenings when nothing worked. You've had moments when the plan failed, the interview ended, the business struggled, the relationship fell apart. The manuscript was rejected. The promotion went to someone else. The video reached only a few hundred people, the opportunity disappeared, the cliff arrived. And maybe that's why Wile E. Coyote has survived for generations. Not because he's funny, because he's familiar. We don't admire him because he always succeeds. We recognize him because we've lived parts of his story. But here's the realization that changed everything for me. We've been measuring his life by the wrong scorecard. We've been asking, did he catch the roadrunner? What if that's the least interesting question? Here's a better one. Who did he become because he kept trying? Think about it. He became resourceful, creative, curious, persistent, resilient. He imagined solutions where none seemed to exist. He refused to believe that one failed attempt represented the limits of his future. Those are extraordinary qualities, and yet they weren't enough. Because there's one final lesson Wile E. Coyote teaches us, one that might be the most important of all. Persistence alone does not guarantee progress. Hope alone does not guarantee growth. Hard work alone does not guarantee wisdom. If effort is never accompanied by reflection, the future becomes a repetition of the past. That's the paradox, the Wile E. Coyote paradox. Persistence without reflection becomes repetition. Reflection without persistence becomes hesitation. Growth requires both. Keep moving, but keep learning. Believe tomorrow can be different, but become someone different tomorrow. That's emotional intelligence. It's not blind optimism. It's informed optimism. It's not refusing to acknowledge failure. It's refusing to surrender your identity to failure. It's not believing every plan will work. It's believing every experience can teach. When I first started thinking about this video, I thought it was going to be about a cartoon. Instead, it became a mirror. Because Wile E. Coyote isn't just an animated character. He's the entrepreneur who launches another company after the first one fails. He's the parent who keeps showing up after making mistakes. He's the student who applies again after being rejected. He's the artist who creates another painting, the author who writes another chapter, the scientist who runs another experiment, the leader who learns from another difficult decision. He's every person who's ever looked at yesterday and decided it didn't get the final vote. But he's also a warning, a reminder that we cannot solve internal problems with external purchases, that another tool is not the same as another skill, that another shortcut is not the same as another breakthrough. That growth begins the moment we stop asking, what should I buy next? And start asking, who do I need to become next? Maybe that's why this story has lasted for more than 75 years. Not because the explosions were funny, not because the animation was brilliant, but because every generation eventually reaches a point where the chase becomes personal. Children laugh at Wile E. Coyote. Adults understand him. And perhaps that's the greatest achievement of the character. He quietly waits for us to grow into the lesson. So the next time life doesn't go according to plan, remember this: the fall is not your identity, it's a moment. The mistake is not your identity, it's information. The rejection is not your identity, it's one chapter. Tomorrow is still unwritten. And tomorrow has always been where Wile E. Coyote placed his faith. Maybe that's why he never really lost. Not because he caught the roadrunner, but because he never allowed failure to convince him that hope was finished. So perhaps the real question was never, why didn't he catch the roadrunner? The real question was always, what kind of person wakes up after 1,000 failures and still believes today might be different? Maybe that's the kind of person the world needs more of. Thank you for watching. And remember, don't just become more resilient, become more reflective, because resilience gets you back on your feet. Reflection helps you choose a better direction. And when those two work together, that's when real growth begins.